Welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/follow. Today on the show, we have Tammie Chang. She is a pediatric hematology-oncology physician, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, Fellow Physicians, What is Our Path Forward? Tammie, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Kevin.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and journey to where you are today?
You bet. Everything about my life today has come out of the darkest period of my own personal life, 5 years out of training, when I was so severely burnt out that I actually was suicidal. And I bring this up very openly. I know you talk with thousands and thousands of physicians, Kevin, and I know now that I'm not alone. 1 in 5 physicians has considered suicide, and we have the highest rate of suicide of any profession. And women physicians are at even a higher risk. We're at 400% higher risk of dying by suicide than women in the general population. So everything about what I do today has come out of that place.
So as you were going through those darkest times of your journey, tell me, who did you turn to? How did you pull yourself up from those depths?
I reconnected with one of my closest friends. We were in an 8-year medical program together at Brown. So my medical school classmate, Louisa Duran, and I reconnected after being not in touch for years because our medical training and our lives get so busy and stressful and crazy. And we connected, realized that we both shared actually a similar story of burnout and severe isolation and despair, honestly. And that's actually why we came together to create Pink Code MD, which is a platform to help all women physicians thrive. And honestly, I think through Pink Code MD, we've saved and healed ourselves and are now helping hundreds and thousands of other women. So that makes it all worth it to us to be able to do this work.
One of the things that you mentioned was the disparity in terms of suicide rates between male and female physicians, and I think the statistic you quoted was 400% higher. What are some of the reasons behind that?
I think we have such a culture of burnout and self-sacrifice and in medicine. And when we take women who are socialized and raised to be helpers and to givers and to be caretakers, and then we also take them and put them in medicine, it amplifies that much further. And I do believe at the heart of why women in particular are struggling is that they struggle to set boundaries to protect themselves and their own well-being.
All right, so let's transition to the Kevin MD article that you wrote. It's titled, Fellow Physicians, What is Our Path Forward? Now, for those of you who get a chance to read your article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Absolutely. I wrote it during the height of the Omicron wave. And this was at the time when our healthcare system was pushed to the brink. All of us really were pushed to the brink. We were on the precipice of honestly buckling, right, under the weight of everything, and the numbers and the staff shortages. And I actually began to see so many almost horrifying parallels between the time I spent working in a Liberian hospital, West Africa, after residency, shortly after the Liberian War ended. And that really struck home for me. And what I really came to recognize, and I shared this in the article, is that what is our path forward as physicians? Our healthcare system is crumbling, and we are quitting and dying by suicide at record rates. What can we possibly do to have a future, right, in this field as physicians together? And really, I do believe, and I know you know this too, and all of your listeners, everyone listening, we have an unspoken bond and understanding among us as physicians, because we have survived so much through our training and all those years. And even in the workplace now, it is a tough job that we have. And so what I really stress in this article is that we must put our own oxygen mask on first. We are not able to help others unless we're okay. And we have to help each other do it, because we have not been trained in a culture that has been supportive of that, right? Asking for help or even receiving help has been honestly perceived as weakness. And it's not. It's absolutely strength. It shows that you have the self-awareness to recognize that you might need some help. And I seriously believe that that's self-leadership. And that's the model that I know all of us want to model for that leadership. We want to model that for our children and for future generations.
You mentioned that there were some parallels between what you saw during the COVID pandemic and your time in West Africa. So tell me some of those parallels.
Yeah, I was a pediatric resident at the time. I was med peds, but specifically acting as a peds resident. We had at least 3 or 4 dozen children die in the course of 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And they're all regular things that would be no problem in the Western world. I spent time resuscitating children in the emergency room, none of whom would survive. And then there were also choices that we had to make. I saw it every single day. We didn't even try to resuscitate those who we knew who wouldn't make it or would need a higher level of care that we couldn't provide, or who would use up resources that could be used to save someone else who had a better chance of surviving. I saw so much of that during the Omicron wave.
And during Omicron, you mentioned a lot of physicians, they're certainly at their lowest point. They suffer from things like moral injury and burnout. Tell us a story, case study, something that either you experienced yourself or from your colleagues. Can you share a story that really illustrates that point?
I'm the medical director of provider wellness for my large healthcare system, and I support and coach physicians and APPs every day. And I'm lucky enough to have others share their very personal, vulnerable stories with me as part of that. And I still remember one story from, actually, it was a group of critical care physicians sharing how hard this all has been. In particular, they have seen the sickest of the sick, but they also have to withstand being yelled at by patients' families every day, accusing them of killing their loved ones because they didn't believe that COVID exists or that vaccination was a thing or even real. And that to them, the first thing they said was that they have no compassion left. They saw themselves angry and crying in ways they never had in their entire lives at the heart of caring for the patients that they've dedicated their lives to.
And when clinicians come to you with stories and say things like they have no compassion left, what are some of the things that you say in response to that?
I think the very first thing we have to do is to give them that space to acknowledge it and to be a safe and supportive listener, a partner, and not try to fix it or offer solutions. Because often when people are in that space, they are not in a place to even be open to a solution yet. We have to allow them to go through it, to heal and come out of it. And then we can talk about what to do next. But really, to me, I think the most important part is to hold that safe space for them.
We've been talking about clinician burnout on Kevin MD for several years now. We talk about it on this podcast, especially during the pandemic over the last few years. And I'm interested, just from your lens, have you noticed that the needle has moved? Have we given enough awareness to burnout? And if so, do you think enough is being done over the last few years?
I'm so grateful that this has been part of your conversation for so long, because it is now being magnified, right? And I think that this is maybe one of the few silver linings of the pandemic, which is that it has completely heightened this entire discussion of burnout, not just among physicians, but in healthcare overall. And I truly believe now we are finally at a time where it's front and center. Every healthcare organization is struggling to find solutions right now. There was that recent headline in Forbes from the Elsevier survey that reports 75% of healthcare workers will likely leave the profession by 2025. Right? I mean, that's huge. What are we going to do if there's no future? There's no one to take care. I mean, who's going to take care of us? You know, who's going to take care of our families, Kevin? Like all of our families, who's going to take care of us when we're older? We have trained for a lifetime to care for others, and yet there's going to be no one left before too long unless dramatic strides are taken right now. And so I think this is our time and our opportunity. We have to, or there won't be a future for all of us.
Now, you mentioned that you were the wellness officer of your healthcare system. Now, from a systems level, what are some of the things that we can do from a systems level to help alleviate these symptoms of burnout and moral injury?
We know that 80% of burnout is system level. It's not because of a lack of resilience on the part of the individual. And so that's 80% of our responsibility, is to do that, not just as an individual healthcare system, but as a nationwide healthcare system. And so, yes, there are things we can absolutely do on the individual organizational level. It's what I do every single day. We put foundations in place to truly foster a culture of wellness, to make things as efficient and streamlined as possible for physicians, especially in the EMR charting, which is the greatest pain point for most physicians today. And in addition to providing resources for personal resilience, that we can do on an individual organizational level. But it's much more complex than that. It's nationwide. It's our reimbursement system. It's the requirements we have for billing and for documentation, all these pain points, all the things that are causing the moral injury, taking us away from time with our patients, which is what brings us meaning and joy and purpose. And we spend most of our time now in front of a computer. That's where the change has to happen, or we won't honestly be around in this field much longer.
So what can we do? It sounds like there's a little bit of tension there. I think a lot of the solutions that we have to alleviate burnout, more time with patients, seeing fewer patients, there is a little bit of tension with that, with the financial realities of a lot of healthcare systems. So you are kind of caught in the middle of both worlds. So what's the path forward for something like this? Like, where do you see the next few years leading when it comes to resolving that tension?
I think many of your listeners, writers, and podcast hosts have also shared the same message, which is all of us have to be part of leading that change, us as physicians. No one is going to care about this more than us, right? And we want this for our own children and the next generations. It's not just right now. We're talking about the future, right? Yeah. Our legacy as in our lifetime. What can we do to make things better for the future generations? So I think we have to lead that change, whether it's on a national legislative perspective, individual, local, at home, in our own organizations. It's lifting up our voices and doing it together.
You have a lot of connection with administrators. What's their view, like people who are non-clinicians, what's their view on the issue of physician burnout? Because when you and I talk, of course, we see the world as one way, but when you talk to administrators, management, how do they view physician burnout?
I think it's so tough because I actually find, certainly in my own experience, that the vast majority are extremely passionate and understanding, and yet they feel trapped to really make massive change because of the restrictions on healthcare and the business of healthcare. It's that tension you talked about between the business of healthcare, which has dramatically changed, right? It's evolved rapidly in the last decade, 2 decades in healthcare in the United States. And so that tension of decreasing reimbursements and less financial stability overall for healthcare organizations, and yet greater and greater pressures on physicians to produce, which is then driving burnout. They get it. They are struggling just as we are to find solutions. And I think the key message that I have to share with your listeners too, because I have the window into both worlds every single day, is that our administrators are struggling too, and they want the best thing, and they are good people doing the best they can with the limited choices they have. That's what I see every day.
We're talking to Tammie Chang. She's a pediatric hematology-oncology physician, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, Fellow Physicians, What is Our Path Forward? Tammie, I understand you recently wrote a book. Tell my audience about that.
Oh, it's called Boundaries for Women Physicians, Love Your Life and Career in Medicine. And I wrote it, actually it was the first Kevin MD article I wrote last year, which inspired me to write this book. It's because I think boundaries are the heart and the key to how we can all love our lives and careers more fully, and especially as women.
So what are some of the key takeaways that you want readers to come after reading your book?
For everyone too, regardless of gender. Really what I want most for all of us and every single one of your listeners and readers is to give yourself that same kindness and compassion that I know you strive to give to your patients and to others. And so when you have the self-awareness to recognize that you may not be okay, that you might need some help, that is strength. It's not weakness. And you are modeling that leadership for your children and for next generations to come.
And my final question, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
Put your own oxygen mask on first and help your colleague do the same.
Tammie, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin.